Also, if you're not currently talking, I would keep yourself muted until you're going to talk.
Good evening, everybody. We're just going to wait a couple minutes until some other people join our presentation for this evening. Hey, good evening. My name is Andrea Bookman, and I am the Director of Special Education and Student Services for the Southern Lehigh School District. Tonight, we are bringing to you a presentation from two of our community partners, Lehigh Valley Hospital and Weller Health Education, on managing grief for death and other losses. Like other areas around us, COVID-19 has impacted our school community. Sessions like tonight's is a way to continue our support for all of our members of our school community. We are grateful for all of our local partnerships, such as Lehigh Valley Hospital, the Weller Health Education, and the Caron Foundation, so that sessions like this can be provided to all of you. Tonight's presentation will also be recorded, and resources from tonight's presentation will also be available on our district website. Our two presenters this evening are Jenna Bauer and Kristen Hoban. Jenna is a licensed professional counselor with certification in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. Jenna has worked in outpatient and community mental health settings for children and families. She has been a school-based outpatient therapist with Lehigh Valley Health Network since 2019. Jenna also specializes in wellness coaching and is a graduate of Southern Lehigh. Kristen is the program manager of Weller Health Education at Lehigh Valley Riley Children's Hospital. Kristen is an experienced health educator who has developed and presented health education programs for students K-12 in school districts throughout the Lehigh Valley and surrounding areas. So Kristen and Jenna, I'm going to turn it over to you for this evening's presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andrea, for that introduction. I'd like to thank the Southern Lehigh School District for inviting us to speak to your school community tonight. We are going to be talking about managing grief for death, as well as other losses. In this COVID world, unfortunately, we ourselves, adults, and many children are dealing with death of a loved one, and they're also dealing with so many other losses as well. So we're going to talk about the different types of losses that everyone could potentially be experiencing in this COVID environment. So normally in a non-COVID world, my job is to go around to the schools and we develop curriculum and we present our health education programs in the schools to your students. And unfortunately, right now we are doing everything virtually. I say unfortunately because we like to obviously be in the classrooms and meet all the kids, and it's great to be interactive, but there have been some kind of silver linings, I call them, to doing things virtually. So it hasn't been all bad. So I hope tonight's presentation is also beneficial, even though we're not being able to meet in person. So I'm just going to start. Of course, I can never get the thing to go. Next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, just want to start with really a general definition of what is grief. So grief is a natural reaction to loss. And again, that could be any kind of loss, but grief is a very strong, it can be sometimes a very overwhelming reaction to obviously the death, the loss of a loved one. It can be in reaction to other losses and changes in our lives, such as divorce or job loss. A move, although again, that's a positive and can be very exciting. There's also those you leave behind, right? So that can be a loss as well. And then there is a loss of health due to illness. So we're seeing a lot of that, obviously, with COVID right now. People's lives are really changing. A lot of people are having long-term health effects due to COVID, and they're experiencing loss of independence, loss of the ability to do things that they once could do more easily. And then there's also the loss that we're feeling right now, which is experienced after a disaster or a traumatic event. And right now, that is what we're all experiencing, every single one of us. I would go as far as to say everyone in the world is being affected by this pandemic. And, normally our children, they a lot of them can get through childhood with minimal trauma. No one gets out completely unscathed, but our kids right now are really going to be experiencing a lot of trauma that we maybe, we haven't had that kind of trauma or loss before. So again, two different types of loss. So there's a physical loss, which obviously relates to the loss of a loved one. It could be the loss of a pet, but a loss of an actual, physical living being, right? So it's that kind of loss. And then there's this abstract loss, which that relates to a person's social interactions, right? So these are drastic changes in our lives, drastic changes in our daily routine. Our kids, perfect example. They're going to school, whether it's fully remote or hybrid, everything has changed for them. Us as adults, a lot of our work environments have changed. So much has changed. And I just want to say, anything that I'm talking about tonight, when we're, talking obviously about how to deal with this with our children, it also applies to us and the other adults in our life. This is not kid specific, but obviously when you're hearing all this, you can apply it to anybody. So the abstract loss, that's the loss of those things in our life that give us comfort, our routine. They give us the feelings of stability, and children, they just thrive on stability. And when that stability is, interrupted, and they don't feel that stability anymore, they can feel this loss, and they can have a lot of anxiety and stress over it. This is a universal emotion, right? Everybody is going to feel some type of grief after a loss, whether it's a physical loss or this abstract loss we're talking about. But there's just no one way to handle it. There's no right or wrong experience, how to experience grief. So all of the losses are significant. I know that, some people, especially the kids. I know last year at the end of the year, when the class of 2020 didn't get any of the the stuff that they had been looking forward to, and I remember we would do some programs virtually for kids, and some of the kids, we do programs on anxiety and depression, and some kids would actually have these feelings like they felt bad, like oh, I feel so bad, but I really shouldn't, because so many people have it worse than me. People are dying, and I'm just missing a graduation. So there's also like this feeling of guilt, because maybe your loss isn't as significant in your mind, isn't as significant as someone else's loss. So that's just another layer to all this when we're dealing with kids and teenagers with grief and loss. So the loss of a loved one. So this is one that I can actually personally speak to, sadly, because I lost my dad in November to COVID. And, it was very, very difficult. And I can tell you that people who are losing loved ones now, even if it's not to COVID, it's a different grieving process. We're not able to have that closure that a normal, traditional, whatever your funeral rituals or whatever, culturally, whatever you would do to have that closure with the death of a loved one, we're not able to do that right now, and that is very difficult. So there's a lot of anxiety around that. It's very overwhelming. You don't get an opportunity to say goodbye a lot of times, because it's a COVID environment. We're not allowed to be there at that bedside. So that's really difficult. And then you're also not able to have that support of your loved ones and your friends that you normally would have in that situation, because people aren't traveling, people aren't gathering. But there are things that you can do, and I'll just share with you some of the things that my family and myself did. So we're all spread out around the country, and so we decided, okay, we'll do like a Zoom celebration, and everybody was, oh, one more Zoom, But I have to tell you, when it was over, we all talked about it. We all talked about it, and we all felt really good about it. I made a slideshow. My nephew made a whole presentation. My brother wrote a song, and we all got an opportunity to see each other's faces, right? Because we hadn't seen each other's faces in a while, but we all got an opportunity to celebrate my dad. And that was very, very helpful. And so we we look at that and we say, well, is that how we would ultimately want to have celebrated his life? And no, but it did help. So there are those ways that you can connect. There are ways that you can get that support, kind of thinking outside the box. And then we're also going to plan to do something when it is safe to gather. And, that's kind of something to look forward to. But I will tell you, being able to kind of have that, Zoom celebration, a virtual celebration, really did kind of put a sense of closure for a lot of us. So that was really, really important. So so this is definitely something that more families are dealing with now, obviously, than they would in a normal non-COVID time. So lot of grief is happening right now around that. And then the next thing is like the loss of the daily routine. So the drastic changes, like I talked about on the other slide, to the daily routine and all of those things that you would do that brought you comfort, that they are all gone. They're all turned upside down. It's all completely different. Those little routines, those little just those little things that you would do, they're so different right now. My coworkers, I just, as much as I really like working at home and we can be very productive, there is that aspect of feeling that loss of connection with coworkers. And I know that the students are feeling that as well. I know when there is a job loss, there has been a lot of unemployment due to COVID. And that really rocks our world, that really, really rattles things. And that whole security and safety that kids really need in their life is affected at that time. And so that's definitely something that will cause a lot of grief in a family. And then just this inability to connect personally. Again, I love to connect with all of you this way, but nothing beats just being in person and being together. And I know that a lot of young children are missing out on this a lot because they're really not able to take it upon themselves to get on their bike and go somewhere. I have teenagers and they can actually do that, and then younger children are really not able to do that, and usually they would be relying on their school environment to get that socialization. So they're missing out on that. And then probably one of the things that, just is really just ongoing and really is the sense of loss is all of these missed special events, all of these missed milestones. It's really, it just keeps coming. It's just wave after wave, right, of things that are we're feeling a loss over. So the milestones. So these disrupted milestones, they lead to feelings of loss and a range of emotions such as disappointment, sadness, anger, frustration, and anxiety. And I really have to I stress this all the time, is that these feelings are likely echoed by family members who are looking forward to the same events. So I have a senior this year, and it sucks. That's all I can say, right? It just really, really sucks for everybody. But for the seniors, they're going to miss out on all of those graduation events, prom, all of the things that they have been looking forward to. And guess what? So are the parents. And I would argue that the kids kind of get over it before the parents do. I sometimes feel like they kind of, can kind of come to terms with it a little bit quicker than we can. We are really upset by all of that, not for our kids not to have those special moments. And they do feel that loss, and they'll never get that back. I know that it's also affected students, juniors, seniors who are looking to go to college and wanting to go on college tours. And, a lot of kids are forced to pick school sight unseen because it's not safe to travel right now, and it's really hard. And that is also kind of this rite of passage that that a lot of students are missing out on. And then the other thing is the student athletes We've done a lot. I've done several presentations for school districts for their student athletes, because this is a big thing, a big sense of loss for the student athletes, because their identity is often wrapped up in their sport. So, you know, if they are I am a football player, I am a tennis player. If I am not a football, if I don't get to play football, then, you know, what am I, you know? So they kind of have this whole sense of identity wrapped up in the sport, which is fine. But when they're not able to be with their team, be with their coach, train with their team, these teams, they train together all year round in some respect, whether it's, you know, in the weight room, or whether it's, you know, box lacrosse, whatever it may be. So there's always together. And so they're really missing out on all of that. And it's been very, very hard on them. So again, we've done a lot of work with the student athletes around this, trying to kind of help them with that. And then the same thing goes for artists, musicians, theater. All of those are the same thing. You know, that is very much their identity, and they are missing out on the opportunity to sing, to play their instrument that they've trained, you know, since they're in 4th grade, right? So they're missing out on all of that. And again, I'll go back to what I said initially with, you know, some people say, oh, but, you know, they feel a little guilty because they're feeling such this great sense of loss, you know, because they're not able to be in the play, or they're not able to play soccer. And they feel like, well, should I really be upset about that? I mean, there's a lot worse things happening right now. Yeah, I definitely think that, yes, that is not the death of a loved one. Obviously, that's much more significant, but this is definitely a loss, and those feelings should not be ignored. Those feelings should be validated. They're grieving, you know, and it's really unfortunate. And then again, what I spoke about just a minute ago about the younger children missing out on all of the socialization. They do, you know, it was really hard to. I used to run the soccer program for Laura McCungy, and in the fall it was so great because you just go around to every park. Anywhere you drove, there was a park filled with little kids soccer, just nets everywhere. And that's just one little sport in one town, you know, and that wasn't there, you know, that wasn't happening the way that it normally would. And that just made me feel so sad for the families, because I just know how much a part of the whole family, you know, the social life, there's a social aspect. It's just, you know, a good, healthy activity. And that's just one example, you know, of what the younger kids are missing out. And then you have your kindergartners. They make me sad too. We do some programs for the kindergartners, and when we get on the Zoom with them, they are so happy. I mean, they are the happiest. You cannot bring down a kindergartner, but they don't know what they don't know, right? Because they've never been to school before. So, you know, there is definitely that sense of loss, probably more on the parents' end, because, you know, this was going to be their opportunity for their child to start those, all that socialization. That's where they learn how to, you know, stand in line. That's where they learn how to wash their hands and take turns and all of that. And it's definitely not, you really can't teach that virtually. So there are just a lot of milestones that are being missed out on, and people are feeling it, you know, and there's definitely a grieving process that should, you know, it's a natural process. Again, any kind of drastic change to your life, any kind of loss, whether it be physical or abstract, you're going to feel these feelings of loss and definitely have grief associated with that. So I am going to actually, our next slide, actually, Jenna is going to pick up here. Let me get there. And Jenna is going to start by talking about the impact of the changes due to COVID. So now I just spoke about all of these different changes, and Jenna's going to pick up here on, you know, what is that impact, you know, to everyone. So I'm going to mute myself. And if you just want to give me a thumb up when you want me to change, I'll be watching. Okay.
All right. Thank
All right,
you.
off you go.
Yeah, that was a really good lead. You hit a lot of great talking points. And I definitely want to pick up by saying that, no loss is too big or too small. We tend to do that to ourselves and put ourselves down and say, well, I didn't lose a loved one to COVID, or nobody died in my family this year, but we're all struggling somehow, especially with the social milestones. So me personally, I had my daughter in 2019 when there was nothing wrong in the world. There was no pandemic. And when I had her and her first birthday, which she was born in January, it was kind of the start of everything, and no one really knew what this was. No one knew it was called COVID, and we just kind of went our own way. We had her party. It was wonderful. And then fast forward 2 years later, this past January of 2021, and unfortunately we weren't able to celebrate it with our family and friends because of COVID-19. So I know I personally am suffering the loss of that social milestone. Now my daughter, who's 2, has no idea what's going on. She sees that we all wear masks and she thinks it's fun, but she doesn't understand. And this is going to be a really difficult thing to have to teach her. So while a lot of you have kids in high school going through their own social milestones, there's other people going through with their kids who are maybe younger, and everybody's just going through the motions together. Like Kristen touched upon, I kind of want the parents to think about, what was your senior year like in high school? Did you go to prom? Did you walk in your graduation? Did you get to go see your college? Did you hang out with your friends socially and go to concerts? All those wonderful things that we do, that you did as a senior, are your kids able to do that right now? So that's something to think about. And while we're all struggling. And then, like Kristen said, with the sporting events and the theatrical events, the musicals and things like that, I've talked to a lot of kids that I see through Southern Lehigh that are various sporting events, theater events, and I see it all within them. They're all struggling because they feel like they don't have a sense of purpose because their theater looks different or their sporting event looks different. There's no spectators there, fans, and they feel like they've lost their determination and their drive to do that because no one's really watching them. That feels uncomfortable. Again, parents, I invite you to think about when you were in sporting events or theater, or you had a job. What did that look like for you? And how does it look different for your kids now? And we all experience a lot of different emotions going into this. So Kristen, go ahead, next slide. So with grief and loss, it's okay, I'll start talking. With grief and loss, there's a lot of different emotions that come up. I know there's the stereotype, when we think of grief and loss, we think of somebody sad. Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. But there's also a lot of other different emotions that people experience. I know Kristen touched upon the guilt, but also what about the isolation? When people are feeling sad, they sometimes isolate away from other people. And this is something to make sure that we are looking upon as we have teenagers in the house. As we all know, teenagers are more likely to want to be with their friends than versus their family members, and that's totally normal. But what isn't normal is when they're isolating away from everyone. So that's where you have to make sure that you're being in touch with your kids and understanding what feelings they're going through. There's also anger, fear, heartbreak, and longing for the loved one that they're missing out on. Next, we're going to go into some stages of grief. I want you all to think about this question. How many losses have you experienced in your own family within the past 2 years? How many losses have you experienced? I can almost guarantee you that a lot of us have experienced more than one because of this global pandemic that we're going in. And when we look at the stages of grief, we're not just talking about the death of a loved one, but again, the social milestones. And there's many different stages of grief. There's actually 7 stages, but on here we just touch upon 5, but I will definitely talk about all of them. So, and also when we talk about the stages of grief, when someone's going through grief, they don't necessarily have to start at shock and denial and work their way through it. They can start at bargaining, or they might get depressed right away. They might go through all of the stages and then they might go backwards. So everybody's grief looks different and we need to remember that. But let's just go through the different stages. So there's the shock and denial. This is when people are in disbelief, they're overwhelmed, they're not really sure what's happening. They're frozen in time, they're numb. They don't know what just happened. They don't believe what just happened. As much as we can try to prepare for, especially the death of a loved one, can we really prepare for that? Did we prepare for this global pandemic? Like I said, when I was sharing my story about my daughter's first birthday party, we kind of heard about this, but how many of us thought it was real? I mean, I know I didn't. I was like, oh, I don't know what this is. This doesn't seem like something that's real until it actually hit. So I think when the pandemic hit, we were all in shock and disbelief. We were mourning, we were sad, we were confused. It was very discomforting. Pain and guilt. This is between denial and anger. When we get to pain and guilt, that's when the shock wears off and it's placed with this unbelievable pain that is very hard on us, and we're having a really difficult time with it. And we have a hard time hiding it. That's when it's fully out. And sometimes in this stage is when we tend to go towards substances such as drugs or alcohol for comfort. We feel sad, guilty. Sometimes we feel desperate or we feel betrayed. And then when we go to the anger and bargaining stage, they actually group those together. This is where we tend to blame others for what has happened. Specifically, if we lost a loved one, we tend to blame somebody for what had happened. This is when we tend to release all that bottled up emotion, and we tend to bargain as if, is this really happening? Is this really real life? You know, if I don't drink anymore, will that bring him back? Like, can we just try to do something different so that we can bring this person back? Like, I'll do anything that I need to do. Just please, let's bring this person back. Or I know I tend to think about that when we go through the global pandemic, you know, like, what do I have to do so that we can bring back concerts? I was supposed to go to 3 last year and they all got rescheduled. And I just keep thinking, like, I really just want to go to concerts again. What do I have to do so that I can get back to going to concerts again? And then also this is, and during this stage, the bargaining stage, this is a really good point in a person's life to think, okay, maybe now counseling is a really good point, because they're starting to figure out what's going on, how they're feeling. They're out of that shock, anger stage, and they're starting to realize, okay, I need a little bit more help. I need some more tools so that I can move forward with my life. And then there's the depression stage. And I know a lot of people, when they hear depression, that scares them and they think somebody's suicidal or they isolate. Yeah, someone who is depressed can be suicidal, absolutely, and can be isolating away from others. But when we talk about grief and loss, this is a very normal stage to be in, and it's a very healthy stage to be in when we go through the stages of grief and loss. And it might make it difficult when we think of memories of the person or of the event that we're mourning the loss of. You may sense feelings of emptiness or despair. You start to really realize the magnitude of your loss and what you're missing out on. You feel heavy, crushed, frustrated during this stage. And then there's this upward turn before we get to the acceptance stage. This is when your physical symptoms start to lessen and your depression begins to lift. It's almost like there's that light at the end of the tunnel feeling when you're going to this stage. You feel strengthening, you feel motivated, you feel awakened. And then you start to restructure and work through the grief that you've experienced. Your mind starts to work again, and you find yourself seeking realistic solutions, problems posed by or without your loved one there, or the loss of that social milestone. You're inspired, you're determined, and you're feeling refreshed. So that last stage of acceptance and hope, this is where we feel like, you know, there's hope. There's a glimpse that we could feel better and that we could move forward. A lot of people believe in this stage that when someone's in this stage, they just kind of forget about who they had lost or what they had lost, but it's not about that. It's about accepting it. A lot of times in counseling with kids or adults in my past work, you know, I tell them, hey, it's okay to move forward. When I've worked with kids who were traumatized and I was doing the TFCBT with them, I constantly would say, it's okay to move forward from your trauma. It doesn't mean that you're going to forget about it. It means that you accept it and you can move forward. And that's the most important thing. You feel hopeful, comfortable, relaxed, and secure. So when we experience the different stages of grief, there's many defense mechanisms that tend to come up within this. Like I said, when we talk about the stages of grief, we talked about denial, and denial is a big one. That is probably the most common defense mechanism. It occurs when we refuse to accept reality or facts. I think everybody here who's listening, who's watching, or listening to the recording can agree with me that you've all experienced this. You know, the phrase, they're in denial, I think that gets thrown around way too often. There's also projection. When we feel uncomfortable with something, we project our feelings onto other people, misattributing like how we actually feel. So a good example of this is you don't like your coworker. You dislike your coworker. So you tell yourself that your coworker doesn't like you, but that's not really true, to make yourself feel better. So that's a good example of projection. Another defense mechanism, which is repression. Painful memories or rational beliefs can upset us. Instead of facing them, we may unconsciously hide them and forget about them, which is not a great thing to do. When going through any type of grief or loss, this is probably the most difficult thing that you could do for yourself. And even in counseling with the kids that I see, I constantly tell them, the more you repress the problem, the issue, this goes for anything in life, the harder it's going to be to move past it. So the more you repress it and push it down, the more it's going to come back and trouble you. So it's best that you actually cope with it and deal with it head on. Then there's regression, and we see this a lot in younger children when they regress back to previous behaviors. It's more of an escape that they feel would be best. When they feel threatened or anxious, they tend to go back to maybe a time in their life where they felt safe. And we look at that as they're regressing back to old behaviors when really they're just doing what's comfortable to them. And then there's reaction formation. And again, there's like so many more. I was just trying to hit the most important ones for you guys to understand. This is people who use this defense mechanism recognize how they feel, but they choose to behave in the opposite manner of their instincts. I know I am definitely guilty of this one. There's been many of times where I'm like, yep, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm going to do the complete opposite. This is a good example of this one is when I may feel that they should not express their negative emotions such as anger or frustration. They choose to instead react in the complete opposite way. So hiding how we feel. I think my most favorite one, which again, I think everybody here can agree that they've done this before, displacement. So a good example of this one is you, and I'm sure your kids have done it too. Kids come home from school, you come home from work, you had a really bad day at work, they had a really bad day at school, and you displace your feelings onto that person. So you're essentially taking your feelings out on other people. And I know I'm guilty of this, and we don't mean to do this, but because we're feeling so uncomfortable, we almost want others to feel uncomfortable with us. And it's usually the people we love the most. We don't mean to do it, but I always used to say this saying when I worked in family-based, hurting people hurt others. It just feels comfortable when other people are in pain with you. It's like really hard to explain, but I hope you guys understand that concept, because to me, it always stuck with me, and I always like to use it from here on out. So, okay, Kristen. Go ahead, Kristen. Next slide, please.
Oh, I keep trying. It doesn't go.
I was gonna say, can she see me?
Yes, I do, and I'm pressing all the buttons. I apologize.
That's okay. Thank you. There we go. So how to navigate grief. I know this one's like kind of black in my slides. So I'm like, I can't read it yet. So how do we help each other? How do we help our kids? It's so important to just be there for the person when they're grieving the loss of a loved one, social milestones, whatever it is. Be there for that person and listen to them. If there's something I've learned out of counseling, it is that people just want to be heard. So as you know, parents, that could be something to take away from that. When your kids are just talking to you, just listen to them, support them, be there for them. I know I mentioned this earlier, grief looks different for everyone. So just because Joe goes through grief differently than Melissa doesn't mean that they're not grieving. Like, they're not grieving in the same way. Everybody grieves differently, and that's okay. There's no limit on grief. A lot of people think that there has to be this timeline for it. There's been many of times I've worked with families that it takes years to, sometimes people are able to go through their grief within a couple of months. Everybody's different, so it just depends. And like I've said in previous slides, suppressing the grief, the loss, will just make it worse. And that is not something that you want to do. So it's super important that when you feel like you're ready and you're in a place of the stage of bargaining is probably the best point to start working in counseling, then you seek out counseling to do so. And it's also super important to identify what your triggers are. If you lost somebody to COVID and there's a room in the house that triggers you because that was their room, it might not be best to go in it, or when you do go in it, have a supportive person in there with you to help you through that time. Once we can understand what our triggers are, then we can better help ourselves. And sometimes we take one step forward and 2 steps back. It's like anything in life. When something's going really well for us, sometimes we take 2 steps back and we're like, well, what happened? We were just doing so well. The same thing goes for grief. And self-care is so important. As a counselor, I talk about this all the time. I'm constantly talking with kids about different things they could do to help with their anxiety and depression. I think meditation, exercises, and eating right is probably the biggest things that I talk about with the kids. Positive thinking can go a long way. So that's super, super important. And I did want to share a story that's going to go into the next slide. Kristen, go ahead, which is on unresolved grief. So I actually, when I was in family-based, I worked with a family. The grandparents had unresolved grief. They had lost their daughter unexpectedly, and they had their granddaughter living with them. And if I wouldn't have known their story, I would have been able to tell that they were grieving the loss of someone just because of the different symptoms that I've noticed within them. The grandmother was using alcohol on a daily basis to be able to cope. So when we look at unresolved grief, we have to look at those warning signs and those symptoms within our children or within other people that we know. Are we using alcohol or drugs to cope with the uncomfortable feeling because it's all we know? If that's the case, then we need to be able to help them to get other help or help them with healthy coping skills like I talked about with the self-care, exercise, healthy eating, meditation, mindfulness. And you know, I've also worked with people who are completely against working through their grief. And I will tell you, I've worked with so many people who've grieved the loss of someone, and when they don't go through that, it doesn't turn out the best. So the best thing you can do is be able to go through those stages and understand that the best thing for you would be to grieve the loss of that person and be able to process through what is going on so that you can move forward with your life. They may experience sadness, depression, guilt more than the normal. This is all more than the normal. Exhibiting low self-esteem, showing an indifference in school grades, failing grades, stop caring about appearance, feeling anxious, withdrawing from family and friends. I mean, I know a lot of these symptoms is a lot of the kids I get at Southern Lehigh to do counseling with, because all the kids are grieving the loss of their social milestones. They don't understand that they're going through their daily life, not seeing their friends as much as they would like, and they're just struggling. So, you know, like I said, the best thing we can do is just be there for them, support them. I've definitely been noticing that counseling for a lot of the kids is definitely making a difference, and that makes me so happy, because that is why I love what I do. I just want people to be happy and be able to move past this pandemic, because we all are in this together. We can all do this together. We just have to be hopeful. We have to be positive, and we have to be supportive of one another and not put each other down. So I think we're at questions, unless anybody else wants to add.
Jenna, that was awesome. I did want to just add something. I know you just touched on it, but I just kind of wanted to emphasize from the parents' perspective with their kids. I know I'm looking at this list of symptoms for unresolved grief. I'm, you know, reading Jenna's other slides, and I'm sitting here ticking off things going, yeah, my kid's doing that. Yeah, my kid's doing that. And I think we just have to really recognize that a lot of our kids and ourselves are going through this process right now. And it's, even if it's not because of the loss of a loved one, but because of the loss of our normal, traditional, expected lives. Everything is so different right now. And I think that sometimes, Jenna, when you talked about denial, sometimes we want to just pretend it's okay. And then when our kids are not going along with that, you know, they'll kind of bring it up, or they'll just, you know, be exhibiting a lot of anxiety. They'll be exhibiting sadness. They'll be withdrawn. They won't have showered for a couple days. You know, we all hear the stories about the kids laying in their beds with with their computers on their lap. You know, these kids are struggling, and sometimes we have to cut them some slack. Okay. And I think that it's, you know, sometimes it's hard for us, because then that would be us kind of having to really admit that, wow, you know what, we are all grieving this loss right now, and my kids are no different. So sometimes we do really need to kind of cut them some slack. We need to listen to them. We need to really validate them, validate what they're feeling, and you know, obviously you want to keep your eye on everything and their behaviors, but I just feel like it's important to stress that you just need to really validate them, what they're feeling, recognize it, and you know, just be there and just cut them some slack. You know, it's so hard. They're really experiencing I mean, they're drastically changed their lives. And so I think it's sometimes we think that they are, you know, more grown than they really are. You know, these are adult problems that these kids are dealing. A pandemic is a pretty adult problem, and you know, the kids are really, they're taking it in stride, and they're doing the best that they can, and so they need our support and our understanding. And just, you know, sometimes they just need a day. You know, even if they just oh, look, you went to class with your Zoom. Good. You know, you did it. You did it. Now I expect nothing else from you today. You know, some days are like that, and it's okay. It's okay to be that way. So I just kind of wanted to add that. My little
No,
2
thank
cents.
you. I
Yeah.
appreciate you adding that. That's super, yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you.
And then the other thing is that I did personally with my own family is to really kind of encourage that self-care that Jenna talked about, the you know, really encouraging trying new things. My basement is now, they're boxing down there now. I don't want to know, but you know, it's something new. And so, you know, they're getting out a lot of pent up frustration. I don't think they're hitting each other, but there's a lot of boxing going on, and that's something new, you know. And it's just an example of something that, you know, I know a lot of kids are, you know, TikTok stars now. And, you know, we all laugh, oh, haha, TikTok. But I'll tell you, there's a lot of creativity, and some kids are doing some really amazing creative videos. They don't have to be on TikTok, but that's usually, you know, the platform they're using. But, you know, there's a lot of really kind of interesting creative things that kids are getting involved in. And I think that we really need to support that. When they come up with ideas, we need to encourage them and support that. So I'll stop talking and open this up for some questions. If anybody has any questions for us, we would be happy to answer them. You can unmute yourself if you'd like to just jump in, or you can put it in the chat. I guess we can Q&A it here. Okay, so yeah, so if you wanted to type something in the chat, you could, or you can unmute yourself, whichever. See, we did such a good job. They don't have any questions, Jenna.
I guess so, right?
Right, as Andrea said, this is going to be, well, it was recorded, and so the link will be available, I'm sure, on all of the Southern Lehigh media platforms. And also, there is the, this is, I don't expect anybody to read this or even, you know, this is going to be the link to the supports, all of the support services that I think every parent should have handy. It has crisis contacts, suicide hotline, all the different support groups. And so this will go along with this link, will be with any of the information that Andrea, that you guys send out. You can send this link along with it. I said I'm not going to make slides out of it. I'll just, you know, make it in, because all of these links work. So when you get that, they can link all of those. So
Yes, and we will also, you know, be putting this on our school counseling website too. So we will be working, you know, with our school counselors to post that as well as a resource to our families. And while I know there are probably several families that weren't able to join us this evening for our presentation, I think it's also important to note if there's any questions or concerns that a parent has about, you know, their child or children, it's really important to reach out to our buildings. Our buildings are here to support you. Our school counselors are always there to support your children and your families. So, you know, we want to hear from you if there's ever any concerns that you have. So I think the first step is to reach out, and then we can work, you know, with the families to, you know, help support you and point you in the right direction. So that's really important for those families who are watching this as a recorded presentation. So that resource is always available. So if there's nothing else from our team, I just want to, thank you, Jenna and Kristen and Thess for being here this evening for tonight's presentation. And we sincerely hope that the information that was shared this evening helps you and your family, even if it's to start the conversation about how your child is feeling during this pandemic and where they are and where their thoughts are. So thank you for joining us this evening and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.